let's dissect this problem. The khutbah at the end of the day is a minimal opportunity, 20 to 30 minutes maximum, to communicate something, right? And it's not communicating something, in my opinion, it's not communicating something in a vacuum. This is something that people continually engage in throughout their life. So you have an opportunity to drip, release ideas and build something, even if you're not the regular khatib. But by design, the khutbah seems to be something that nurtures something over time, right? To me, the problem isn't just a matter of style, like the speaker's monotonous or they're boring or whatever, or substance, or they didn't really say something profound. I think before style and substance, before that is actually thought process. Like what makes me want to give a khutbah? And to me, if you identify the objectives, one objective is you want to motivate someone, right? Which seems to be the most common sort of thing. I want to motivate someone. And we compare that to reminder. I want to give someone a reminder equals I want to motivate someone. We've made this kind of subconscious equation in our head. The problem with that is motivation is a fleeting thing.
Yeah.
And we've become motivation addicts. So my problem now is youth come and say, hey, I watch all these Islamic videos. I feel so motivated. And then I get unmotivated. And then I fall apart. And could you please say some words to motivate me? And I look at it and I was like, this sounds like drug addiction. This sounds literally like you just need something to give you a boost. Then you're going to fall off. Then you give a boost, which means your entire relationship with the religion is based on your emotional state.
Just iman high, iman low.
We use that term, iman high and iman low. But if you just step back from the terminology for a second, it's just an emotional high and an emotional low.
Yeah.
And we're dressing it up with prettier words. But actually what that means is we don't have a stable worldview predicated on which we build and develop ideas, right? Yeah. So the more this comes from my own bias, my own studies in Quran that are very much underway. They've been underway for 20 something years, but now I feel like now I'm starting my study of Quran. One of the things that's emerging is the Quran really wants to develop a thought process. The Quran really wants us to think a certain kind of way. And the purpose of the khutbah for me is actually, if motivation happens or inspiration happens, that's cool, but it's a byproduct. To me, and it's not even knowledge that I'm trying. And the second thing is knowledge. I'm going to give these people knowledge they don't know. I'm going to drop some knowledge on them. And knowledge to me, again, I'm going to use kind of almost dissecting language. It's just the delivery of information, right? And we happen to live in the information age. So there's no shortage of information. So if somebody wants information, they don't need to come to the khutbah to get information. Yeah. But this environment, people leaving their work, coming and sitting and concentrating, and then having this minimal time where they know they're doing this as an act of worship to Allah, that mindset is something that needs to be capitalized on, and then say, I'm going to give something that at the very least, I'll call it's food for thought. Like it's something that changed my perspective significantly or shift my perspective closer to the word of Allah in some way or the other. And the worldview of the Quran is essentially based on how we think about things like how we think about history, how we think about our behaviors. What are the core principles that are at play, whatever the situation is going on in the world. For example, somebody wants to comment on what's going on in the world, right? The go-to is let's find a story in our history that seems to correspond in some way and has some points of convergence with the events that are taking place. 100%. So if there's a war, let's tell a war story from history, right? Or if there's a need to give, let's give a charity story, right? Because then the point is they're going to give charity. My problem with all of that is you're looking at the surface of the literature, the sacred word. Yeah. You're not looking at the principles underlying it. And it's actually, once you understand the principles, they have universal value, and then they can apply to situation A, situation B, situation C, right there. Because Gaza is on everybody's minds, for example, right? And every khutbah, if you give a khutbah about anything right now, somebody will come along and say, brother, you didn't give a khutbah about Gaza, right? And even that, as unpopular as that may sound, may Allah Azza wa Jal, secure Jannah for the shuhada of Gaza and give them peace and prosperity and security, and punish the people that are doing the satanic things that they're doing to them.
I mean,
Right? Like, having said all of that, the issue is even on that, what's the mindset become? Well, unless I hear something about Gaza, that means the Ummah doesn't care. These leaders don't care. Right? Wait, hold on. And then unless somehow it's tied in to, and I critically really tried to listen to what's being said about the subject from an Islamic perspective. And what do you get? We're so helpless. We're so powerless. One day Allah will get them. And we have to wake up. Okay. And then when you keep hearing the Ummah has to wake up, everybody sitting there is like, yeah, the Ummah has to wake up. I'm already awake though.
Yeah.
Like, everybody else got to wake up. Or if best case scenario, somebody looks at themselves and says, yeah, I got to wake up. What does that mean? What I got to do? Like, I got to, pray more? What are you asking me to do? There's no, and maybe they're not capable of thinking in that way. Like, what am I supposed to do with this information, right? And that's, to me, the job of the khatib is to say, okay, let me nudge you in a certain direction and give you not just practical steps, but really thought through, what does this look like, right? And how does change happen? So this last khutbah, for example, I just gave khutbah in King Fahd yesterday, and it was in fact about Gaza. And what I was talking about was, let's look at this disastrous tragedy, and people look at this and say, how can Allah let this happen? Or what are we supposed to do about this? And I can't watch this anymore, and all of this, right?
Yeah.
I'll say, okay, let's step back from this for a second and think about what's been happening to the Uyghur Muslims, that is not showing up on your feed because TikTok is Chinese, right? Or let's look at what's been happening in Sudan or in so many. The list is very long, right? But when we see something, the ummah is like, oh, this is intolerable, but it's actually happening all the time. And then let's take even a further step back. Okay, when it's atrocity to this level, it's inexcusable. But when you see child abuse in your own country, and you see homelessness, and you see other forms of tragedy, it's not as extreme. So I can live with that. I'm okay with that. So are we sensitized to some things and desensitized to others? And what does the Quran really want us to think about this? And let's look at tragedy in the seerah. Like, did the Prophet ﷺ not love humanity more than we could? Did he not love the believers more than we could? When he sees Bilal being tortured, is that not a state of emergency for the Prophet ﷺ? Right? And is he not like gutted? And actually the people that love him, that he loves the most, are the people that are torturing him the most and humiliating him the most. And the situation continuously escalates. So the Prophet ﷺ is in an enormous amount of agitated state continuously for 13 years, continuously. But Allah seems to just keep telling him what looks at the surface like a passive, وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُونَ, be patient over what they say, أَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ, ignore the ignorant, فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. Ayat on top of ayat. Just let them be, let them do their thing. Allah will deal with them. You just do what you got to do. Pray, make the speech in the night and the mornings, and remember Allah, etc., etc. But then you have to step back and ask, why did Allah do that? Like, why did He do that? Hindsight is 2020. You got 2 decades, a little over 2 decades, to change the world, and 13 years are going by and ain't nothing happening. And Allah is not even saying, by the way, pretty soon I'm going to let you make hijrah, and then you're going to build an army, and you're going to take care of these people. Just wait until then. He's not telling him anything. He's not telling him. So when you think about that, what he's actually doing is he's cultivating a mindset. He's building a certain kind of maturity in the Sahaba, that they're not going to react to the situation. They're going to build themselves no matter what. And it's the people that really were able to, that's why the parable in Surah Al-Fath is about the crop that matured, because when they're so strong within, the simplest way, I don't want to ramble on with it because we got so many things to talk about, but the simplest way to put this is Allah built a group of people that instead of the outside world impacting them, He was building people that wherever they are, they keep impacting the outside world. Right? So instead of being reacting to situations, the world is
acting and influencing situations.
They're influencing situations.
Mindset.
So, time he had no institutions shall be named, no individual shall be pointed out. Was a well-known scholar, and the people who don't really distinguish scholarship from scholarship, right? But well-known scholar came to my office, and they had one of my tafsir open on the desk. He goes, "So this is the one you get your things from." And I was like, actually, no, on literary issues, when it comes to how ideas are progressing within a surah, I do read Islahi. But when it comes to BALAGHI nuances, I read Ibe Ashur and Alusi. And then probably if they miss something, I'll go back further in Razi and kashaam. And then when it comes to the AASAAR, even though I start with Ibn Kaseer rahimahullah, I'll move on to Qurtubi because I think he synthesizes things really beautifully from the athari perspective. And I kind of started walking him through my library. And he goes, "Do you have a list?" And I said, "You're the alim. I'm not the alim. You're the sheikh. I'm just the guy. I'm just the research guy." And not to dismiss those that actually do the work. But what I've realized is the people who actually do the work are not that loud.
They're busy.
They're busy.
They're busy reading with their nose in a book.
Yeah.
Like that's literally what it is.
And then sometimes I'll hear speeches and people will say things that like with such like pounding the podium and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says X, Y, Z. And I'm like, no, he doesn't. Actually, he really doesn't. Mm-hmm. And then after the talk, I'm not going to call him out on stage or even in public. Backstage, I'll be like, "Bro, you said this, but look at this, look at this, look at this." Because I didn't think about that. I was like, "Yeah, that's my point."
Wow.
That's kind of my point, you know? So I've become more humble to my own ignorance in Quranic studies the more I've moved forward. Like, even just studying Surah Al-Qiyamah, right? Yeah. This was new education for me. Like, every surah I take on now is just entirely, like, freshman.
Yeah, you were here for a week. We were actually trying to get a hold of you earlier. And you spent I think you spent almost every morning reviewing before the 3-hour dars at night.
No, my study of Surah Al-Taghabun ended almost a month ago. I've been studying Surah Al-Qiyamah full-time, at least 6 hours a day. I've been studying Surah Al-Qiyamah since that time. And then when Quran Week started last week, I got here and I was up at Fajr. My parents were with me. I was up at Fajr, and my nieces and nephews were here too. And I wanted to play with them, but I couldn't because Surah Al-Qiyamah. So from Fajr until AASAAR, I was basically buried. And then I would just drive off to the masjid to do the dars.
Yeah.
And that was my life for the last week. So you're like, "Did you see California?" I was like, "No, I just saw my laptop and my books. That's all I saw."
I hope you're in a nice hotel.
We experimented with an Airbnb
on
this
topic,
time.
Though, because it's a good transition. When you approach the Quran, so I guess you've been made famous, quote unquote, through how you present the Quran to people, especially English-speaking audience, because we're not used. Because you're right, there are a lot of alim scholars in other languages who do hit these same beats.
Yeah,
I think in English we were really divorced from that. We're so used to thou, art, XYZ language in our translations.
Yeah,
so people felt really disconnected. So you came and you and your team have developed like these 5 lenses of how you approach the Quran when you try and do something from scratch. Like, all right, I'm going to come to Surah Al-Qiyamah, brand new, as if I've never read this before. Can you walk us through? I'm going to put, I know language is one of them. I'm going to put that last because it'll transition to other things.
Yeah.
But to go through them, one of them you call it Quranic worlds. What does that mean? Like, are you looking at a surah?
So where you got that from, that series I did with Dr. Suhaib and Fahim on the 5 lenses of contemplating the Quran.
Yes.
I'd like to give you a preface to that.
Please.
And the preface to that is, what is the difference between tafsir and contemplation, right? And this is a really important distinction that every Muslim should know. The objective of tafsir is very simple: to not misunderstand what's being said. If you just take that as the axiom, the purpose, the objective of tafsir is to make sure you're not misreading what's being said. So, and therefore, you know what the word means, you know what the context is, you know what the pronoun, who the pronoun is referring to. If it's talking about Pharaoh, you're not thinking it's talking about Abu Jahl or something. You didn't mix people up, right? So you've got your information right. To give you a parallel, it's like you heard something on the news. The objective of tafsir is investigative journalism. Make sure you got the accurate report on what this actually was, right? Now that you have the accurate information, now let's think about that information. That's tadabbur. So tadabbur is the next step.
Yeah.
Now the problem with translation of Quran is sometimes the translations are missing elements of accuracy. Sometimes they're missing elements of context. So your starting point information is sometimes lacking. Right? So now if as an average Muslim, I'm trying to contemplate the Quran on top of something that's already lacking, then I'm building an entire narrative on something that I may have not even understood properly to begin with, which can be very problematic. And that happens all the time. So the thing with our learning institutions was, let's make sure we teach our students proper tafsir. But then there was no discussion about how do you take tafsir and actually do what is supposed to be done, tadabbur. So the Quran, the Quran keeps talking about how it's clear, right? And why don't you understand? You could think of that as pointing us towards tafsir. And when it says, why don't you think deeply? Why don't you contemplate? Why don't they contemplate? Are their hearts locked? That's tadabbur. Now that's where these 5 lenses come in.
Gotcha. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And now you see your place in the world starting from Adam all the way to yourself. That's what Baqarah does. And actually, if you step back, look at Baqarah, right? So what I'm saying is, should students engage? Yes. Should they be asking questions? Should anybody be reading the Quran and saying, what does this mean? What does this mean? Yes. Because when you ask what this means, you're actually looking for tafsir.
You're mentally engaging.
You're mentally engaging, and it's giving you, and the Quran, I believe Allah did this on purpose. I've experimented with non-Muslim friends. Here, read it, tell me what you think. Man, I got questions. What does this mean right here? What does this mean right here? The Quran, Allah designed it that somebody engaging it will have questions. That they'll be hit by some things, confused by some things, curious about some things, and Allah wants to capitalize on that curiosity, so they will go to a believer and say, tell me what this means. And the more they learn, because even the Quran says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. There was a process behind that, right? In a different context. But that's the mechanism that was supposed to be in place. We didn't put that in place. In fact, places that we glorify as places of knowledge, like in South Asia, for example, the common narrative among Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi Muslims is you shouldn't read the Quran, you'll get misguided. Did you know that? That's the most common sentiment towards the Quran. You should not read the Quran in meaning. Read it for barakah, read it for this, read it for that. But if you read it by yourself, or you're reading translation, the Imam will come and tell you, don't do that, you will be misguided. Right? Yes, and hundreds of millions of Muslims believe this. Can you imagine the impact on the ummah that has had? Right? So that does, and on the extreme end is what you're saying in the Bible study approach. Well, the ayah says, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا, but I feel like a shams is talking about LED lights and how they you can change the...
I can get the sentiment of the Southeast Asian. I think what they were doing was trying to prevent the other end.
Right.
They're saying, if you go, you'll start doing this. You'll say the sun is the LEDs.
Right.
So I understand where that was coming from, but now you've messed up the worldview of an entire generation, because now they're like, I can't engage it at all. Then give the alternative. I guess that's the issue.
Yeah.
And the alternative is, just study the ilm. My problem with that overly simplistic answer is if I open up Ibn Kaseer, rahimahullah tafsir, and I say, okay, I'm just going to read this. This is what I'm going to rely on.
Very common English translation, you see.
Are you though? Because we say things very simplistically. Oh, the most reliable tafsir is this. Yes, it's a remarkable tafsir. Are there issues in that tafsir? Yeah, totally. I'll give you an example. We say the earliest tafsir are the most authentic, and the earliest opinions are the most authentic. Great. You want to hold on to that? Let's see how that plays out. Allah says in the Quran, any ayah of da'wah, okay? Ud'u ila sabili rabbik, and for example, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ, right? وَهَذِهِ بَصِيرِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ أَنَا وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَنِي. Many places in the Quran call to the path of your master. This is my path. I call it to it with insight. Or who's better in speech than someone who calls to Allah, calling to Allah, calling to Allah, calling to Allah. In very early opinion, look this up yourself. I won't name the tabi'i, but one of the earliest opinions is, all of these ayat are abrogated because the surah of fighting came. None of the ayat are ever applicable again. And this is recorded in classical books, including works of Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah. Would you literally go up there and give that as, okay, I'm going to give the authentic tafsir of this ayah? Would you endorse that? Because I don't even believe that to be correct. I would challenge it. And I have challenged it with scholars. And I said, do you accept this opinion? Well, it is a classical opinion. I was like, yes, but do you accept this opinion? And what are your evidences for accepting? Because I'll give you my evidences for rejecting it. Right now, I'll have those conversations. Or, for example, we are so proud of saying, Islam says, La ikraha fi din. There's no compulsion in religion.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah.
Do you know? We use that as one of our
Yeah.
That's
Mantra.
a Western. That's
here.
a Western Muslim tenet of faith, I think.
Yeah,
I'm just being facetious, but
and the many classical works, it's abrogated.
Yeah.
And that's highly problematic. How can, to me, even the subject of abrogation is a topic by itself. But like,
yeah.
We overly glorify classical works as if everything was figured out, right? Many things were figured out. Many things left us with more questions, and scholars came after to try to address those questions, and it kept building and building. If everything was figured out in a particular book, there was no need for additional work, right? But the volumes and volumes that have been written in tafsir have been done for a reason, not just because somebody just decided, I'm going to do what's already been done. They were all thinking, I need to do something that hasn't yet been done. There's more needed here, right?
That's a miracle of the Quran. You can have 1,400 years of scholarship, many tafsir, and every time someone is finding out a new understanding or figuring out something new, and we're nowhere near exhausting it. This will keep going on until the end of time.
No, and then the fact of the matter is, I went to Pakistan. One of the most tragic things, we have millions of hufaz.
MashaAllah.
And went to Madaris, and I said, where's the, has not got the takhasus Qur'ani? Like, is there a Qur'an specialization in this madrasa where they cover the entire Qur'an and they probably, no, we don't do that.
Oh, it's just,
I was like, is there any other madrasa in Pakistan that does that? These are the Alamiya programs. Is there any other madrasa that has a takhasus in the Qur'an? No, we don't know. I found one in Northwest, very obscure in Northwest Province, where they teach tafsir and tadabbur. Actually, it was really cool. But overall, no. We just read Tafsir Jalalain and we move on. Jalalain is one of the most concise commentaries on the Quran, right? It doesn't go into any details. And genuinely, if you're studying it, if your mindset is, that's the answer, now I know. If that's your answer, that's your attitude, you'll get a lot out of it. If you're going with an inquisitive mind, you're going to come out with more questions than answers.
Is it like a very surface level?
It's just like synonyms. Like Allah said this, the synonym is that. Allah said this, the synonym is that.
Yeah. Or some context in some
Very
cases, some sabab nuzul in some cases.
Okay.
But what I find really exciting that's happening in the Muslim world, in the world of scholarship now in Quranic studies, is there's this really incredible curiosity into the text. And there's really digging deep.
You're seeing a resurgence of this, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's happening in Islamic universities around the world. And it's really cool. It's really cool to just I feel like I'm not at the front of this. I'm in the back seat, just a spectator, and I'm getting a glimpse of some of these amazing things that are happening and picking them out and engaging with some of them. It's really cool.
I think this can pivot into our next topic about bayina.
Sure.
Yeah, like, is this where you kind of see bayina headed, kind of engaging in these quote unquote cutting edge research or development of these methods or discussions or interacting with these institutions in this way? Like, where do you see this going? Where do you see bayina going in this
I have
way?
a sort of a bigger picture thing with bayina.
Fadal.
So the idea that I have in bayina is that humanity deserves to have better access to Quran and to engage with Quran in the way that Allah intended it.
Okay.
Right? I'm not saying even after doing a lifetime of work that I'll have the right answers about what the Quran actually means. I'm going to do my effort, but that's not my mission. Isn't they should learn what I have to say. My mission is the pathway to engaging with the Quran and exploring it in a way that Allah intended should be initiated and should be rejuvenated, right? Now, what that means is at the highest level, it's cutting edge research, whether it's the cross-section of Quran and biblical studies or history or the humanities and all kinds of things. Now, we'll talk about the contemplation, some of the elements, like you said, the world of the Quran, right? But underneath that is the Quran needs to be presented in language that university students can understand if they're not tafsir students. Underneath that is the Quran needs to be presented to teenagers in language they can understand without them feeling like they're being subjected to some old people conversation. Underneath that is kids need to be engaged. Underneath that is, preschoolers need to be engaged in the Quran. And if you work forwards, how do I build up a kindergartner? And I have a plan for a kindergartner that by the time they come out of high school, they have a Quran-inspired worldview, and they have a pretty good grasp of what this book is about, and they're really passionate about continuing to explore the treasures of this book for the rest of their life. Like that, how do I do that? I have these 11 years to do this with a kid that he just in his or her adulthood, they're just diving into the Quran for its richness their entire life and exploring its meaning.
So worldview building curriculum.
Yeah, a Quranic worldview building. The thing I experienced, you were in the full-time dream program, and again, I'm unfiltered in this for some reason. So I really wanted people to learn Arabic so they can get into Quranic studies. But Quranic studies at that point was my personal venture. Like I was engaging in I couldn't figure out a system for it. Like how do I systemize the study of the Quran? So a lot of my students, they studied Arabic with me, and then they went on to do Islamic studies elsewhere.
Yeah.
But a lot of those Islamic studies institutions were byproducts of institutions that are already in the East, which I already told you have many fossilized approaches to curricula. Right? So they're learning beneficial Islamic sciences, but they're not pushing the boundary to, and it's certainly not Quran-centric. Right? It's not like you're going to go to an institution and by the time you come out, you have this really deep, beautiful grasp of the Quran. What you mostly have is a really good understanding of fiqh. You have a pretty good understanding of hadith issues. You have a pretty good understanding. Other subjects get a lot of attention. The Quran gets ceremonial attention. I told the alim in Pakistan, the only subject in Islamic studies that's the yatim is Quran. Like we've replaced Quran with hifz. And we call it we're learning Quran. That's not learning Quran. That's learning the sounds of the Quran. That's not the Quran. Quran is a message. So that it didn't get the attention that I was hoping it deserved.
Wouldn't someone argue that if someone is studying fiqh and hadith and tafsir and Arabic, that's all tied to the Quran?
Yeah, it's the same
they're all pulling from those sources and engaging with the Quran to maybe understand what this hadith means, or pull out a fiqh ruling, right? Like that's kind of
that'll be 6 other podcasts, but I'll tell you.
I'm just saying at a surface level,
At a surface level, I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt.
No, just the other side of the argument. The other side of the argument,
they were supposed to have been inspired by the Quran,
mm-hmm.
but they went down such rabbit holes that when I sit with fuqaha and say, you have this asl, where did this asl come from? I really want to understand this asl and how it developed. And then we try to trace it back. And the path is so obscure sometimes. Going back to the origin, I was like, what happened to it being Quran?
Like you're saying that asl is like from this person to this person to this, like they have
right.
a chain,
And
but
this is why I've become a huge fan of Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. I'm just fascinated by this man. I think, I'll say this without a filter, I think he's one of the most, if not the most lied about luminaries of Islamic history.
Lied about?
Yeah, lied about, yeah.
In what?
He's misrepresented.
By whom?
Everybody. People don't study
statement.
him. Yeah. I will boldly say this. I will boldly say Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is misrepresented. Oh, he didn't have
controversial.
He didn't have enough access to hadith. He didn't know this. He people try to kind of, how you like softly try to undermine someone?
Yeah.
There's a lot of soft undermining of Imam Abu Hanifa. And if you actually study his history and his record and his output and he's the grandfather of all things fiqh, right? There's a reason for that. And I'll leave you curious for that. And I'll point you to some people that can help you with that one. But I tell you, we need to rediscover this man. He was onto something.
Well, you chose the right method. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
Wait, you're Hanafi, right?
I identify my
question.
No, not at all. I identify myself as early Hanafi.
Early Hanafi.
Yeah.
I've never heard of this before.
Well, now you have. I identify myself as early Hanafi.
Wow.
Actually, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. There's a lot I could ask.
Oh boy.
Back to the Quran. Back to expertise, as you're saying.
But it is tied to the Quran.
Yeah,
Because Abu Hanifa rahimahullah had a profound Quran-centric worldview that informed his entire fiqh. And it's so appealing if you study it. And if you look at his thought process, it's incredible. I feel like it's ironclad. It's incredible. And the person that I put next to him and like to complete is Imam Malik. Like these two.
Killer.
Man,
Killer combo.
that's a killer combo. That's a killer combo. Anyway,
let's
you have,
we can be brief about this because we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
another topic to broach. But I do want to ask. So now, okay, I'm in a tafsir thing. I'll have some young professionals. We want to come and sit down, talk about the Quran together. So open up. We have my sheikh told me like this translation is very good, has all the right commentary, so you know what the information is. You know what the context is, has the right footnotes. The translations are like pretty darn good. Okay, now I'm sitting with my group and we want to read these ayat together. We're going to read these 10 ayat together and we read them and we want to reflect on it.
Yeah.
How would you tell them to approach that reflection process?
There's so much you can do with that. And one of the things you can do after the tafsir homework, like you said, is what I call the world of the Quran. And the world of the Quran is calling upon something. The Quran is commenting on something, and it's to really understand it, you have to put yourself in it. You have to enter it. So, for example, Allah is talking about the pharaohs. Firaun spoke. Firaun said this.
Yeah.
I need to study some ancient Egyptian Egyptology. I want to know what the pharaohs were like. I want to know how they dressed, what their courtroom looked like. What can I gather about the pharaohs? I want to put myself in the pharaoh's court.
Yeah.
Right? Allah is talking about winds. Right? When I was studying Surah Al-Dhariyat, I spent 2 weeks, I think, looking at winds, papers on wind, and how wind works, and how, because Allah says winds carry. I was like, what are they carrying? Okay, they carry clouds, but Mufassir mentioned they carry clouds, they carry dust. It's like, how do they carry dust? I didn't know that, volcanic ash from around the world can end up like you can have sand from the Sahara
Ends up in Southern America.
It ends up in the beach of Florida.
Yeah.
Like وَالذَّارِيَاتِ ذَرْوَةً.
Yeah.
Right? So like, then it gives you a new meaning to the ayah. أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يَأْتِي بِكُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا. Wherever you may be, Allah will bring you back. Because I'm going to die. My body's going to decay. Part of my body's going to become dust particles. And they're going to fly all over the place. They're going to be everywhere eventually. Allah says, wherever you may be, He'll bring you all back. So like it just, so your contemplation on what Allah is saying gets so heavy when you decide to stop and think about the world He's inviting you to explore. Like this most recent one that's on my mind is Surah Al-Qiyamah, because I just finished it. And Allah said the guilty conscience. He swore by the guilty conscience, and nafs al-lawama, the self that blames.
Yeah.
So I said, I can't understand the guilty conscience until I understand conscience. And I can't understand conscience until I study conscience. So I started studying conscience. I looked at conscience from the Islamic perspective, the Quran, the historical perspective, the theological perspective, the Christian, Jewish perspective on conscience. Then I looked at the philosophical perspective on conscience. Then I looked at postmodern conscience discussions. How does Freud describe conscience? How were philosophers or scientists even quantum physics describing consciousness, and how are they describing it post? How are evolutionary biologists describing consciousness? And I'm just looking at this entire spectrum, and I'm thinking, how is the Quran responding to this? How is the Quran responding to all of this, right? And I read some amazing books on the subject written by Muslim intellectuals that just absolutely mind-blowing stuff. Right?
Give us one.
My favorite one, Ideology of the Future by Mohammad Rafiuddin. It will blow your mind. It will blow your mind. Book was written between the 40s and the 50s, and you would think it was written yesterday. It's just next level stuff. But anyway, so it took me down into that world, the world of conscience, and because Allah put that at the onset. It's called Bara'at Istihlal in Balagha, like a grand opening. The surah has a grand opening where He took two grand ideas, Yawm al-Qiyamah and Nafs al-Lawama, and now the rest of the surah. Right, so it's like those two ideas are echoing throughout the surah.
This is where you would like really benefit from expertise in subjects, like where you have the guy when you're talking about anything that do biology. The guy who's a doctor starts giving you X, Y, Z.
That's
thing,
right.
And the guy who's a civil engineer says, "Oh, like my dad, he was reading the end of Surah Al-Mulk. Allah says the water will go down and you won't be able to bring it back out fresh." And he's like, when I was younger, I was like, we can put wells and drills and whatever. It's not a big deal. But he's in water irrigation. He's like, oh yeah, you can't get it back fresh though. If it goes down, you lose that. Like you're gonna have all this
Subhanallah.
yeah. So he's like, oh yeah, that now makes total sense why Allah said it that way, as opposed to just saying like the water goes away.
See, an engineer would see that, and you and I wouldn't see that. The same way I was talking about, it was Surah Al-Najm, and I was talking about it in Dallas, and there was actually somebody who works in neurology, and works in genetics, and they had done a lot of research on something within the genome that I'm going to butcher this because I have no background, but basically there's some kind of a capsule we all have in our cells. That's the death gene, and it starts slowly releasing, and that's part of how death starts happening slowly.
You also have like the DNA strands, the telomeres at the end, they get shorter over time.
Yeah.
So the DNA is like
so
dying out.
There's research on how to keep it from releasing so that we can have longevity and not die, basically, right? And every time they try to mess with it, it expedites death. So how
Pandora's box, they open it up, it just because it works.
I couldn't have known that, and he comes and he tells me, and then there was another really interesting. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Ala comes from Ilya, and it's in Surah An-Najm too. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكَ تَتَمَارَى. Right, Ilya, something, and Ilya is the joint of the thumb. Is Ilya.
Okay.
And from it etymologically came the idea of doing something unique that nobody else has done. Came ala, and a couple of people that were doing evolutionary biology, like the opposable thumb, actually allowed us to grab tools in ways that nobody else. And it's Allah is drawing that parallel and saying Allah does things that nobody else can do.
Oh, very interesting.
SubhanAllah. In short, I would say that the way I view a surah and the way I think your audiences can really grasp the subject is by an analogy. Allah is al-musawwir. He's the painter. He's the depictor. He's artistic. So he didn't just deliver a message to us that has quantifiable information. God is one. There's a judgment day. He depicted that information artistically, right? So the surahs are a depiction of how artistically he delivered his message. So there's a beauty to the Quran for that reason. There's a rhythm to the Quran for that reason. Now, if you think of architecture and so kids, you give them each the same 100 Lego pieces, the same 100 config, and say, build me something. Their creativity will lead them to build something entirely different, right? When you walk into a building, a gorgeous building, you're going to look at the arches, you're going to look at the window design, you're going to look at, especially in ancient building where there's a lot of handicraft, right? What was going on in the mind of the maker, how the light will pass through this place, et cetera, et cetera. Every surah is like a palace, one of Allah's palaces you've entered. And there's attention to detail. And just like every brick is put in the place, actually the most beautiful depiction of that in the Quran is actually in Surah Al-Qiyamah. Allah says, بَلَا قَادِرِينَ عَلَىٰ أَن نُسَوِّيَ بَنَانَهُ. After the human being question, how will bones be put back together? Allah says, we will even perfect down to the finest detail fingertips, down to the fingertips. So the question was about jama', and Allah replaced it with taswiyah, right? What's really amazing is the only other time jama' is mentioned in the surah is inna alayna jam'ahu wa qur'anahu.
Bringing the Quran together.
Bringing the Quran together. And there's a connection being drawn, speaking of connections, just how every joint has its place, has its size, has its function, has its angle in my hand, in my wrist. You can't take a rib bone and put it in my index finger, right? It doesn't fit. The same one who did that is the same one who put the design of a surah together. So every ayah fits. It's perfect. And its words are perfect. And when you look at the Quran from that perspective, your entire exploration changes. You're not just saying, just get to the point. No, the details are the point. The details are where, because otherwise this surah is about akhirah. This surah is also about akhirah. Oh, that one? Akhirah. Right?
It's all about the same thing.
But when you see the individual, because that's like saying, going into a gallery and saying, this painting, yellow, green, and blue, that painting, almost the same colors. Oh, no, but they're painting. Look at the art, bro. You're just thinking it's canvas and paint. But you're skipping the entire artistry. That's like saying a beautiful piece of jewelry is just metal. There's artistry. That's like saying the BMW and the Audi and the Porsche and the Hyundai and then the 1987 whatever are just metal, and there's an artistry, there's a design, there's a mechanism, there's engineering. You're reductionist. It's reductionist. And so we have this reductionist view of the Quran, and we're so offended when others are reductionist. We're doing it ourselves, right? So the connections within the Quran, within the surah, actually are extremely telling. They're extremely, extremely informative, and they make you appreciate and give you an awe of the of the way Allah has crafted His word for us.
And for the record, this is the one contribution I give. This is my connection.
Yeah. He's helped so much with Nadl, mashallah, especially with the sequence. And I look at, as you know, I look at sequence in three ways,
yes.
Or the linear, the anchors. Even the anchors, I've now evolved it a little bit. I call them echoes and anchors. So echoes are the almost exact word being repeated, like ayahsabu al-insan, ila rabbika yawma idhin, ila rabbika yawma idhin. Okay, those are echoes, and then anchors are similar idea.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of a difference between
Brings
the two.
You back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other lens is general lessons, but I'm gonna go ahead and skip that, and I'll let people go online. And then the last one, because this will transition to everything else.
Yeah.
And this is probably the one, and I want to start. Usually you start with it, but I brought it last because it kind of ties it all together. Language. So this is what I think you're famous. Your mantra was MAGA, make Arabic great again, and you're the original proponent of that. So
wait, you said that?
I didn't. I'm pretty sure I didn't. And if I did, I disown this. Disavow any
original MAGA. But anyway, so you're very big on looking at Allah's word choice. So Allah could have used, and Tafsir is very big on saying like, so you're asking about Jalalain. He may say like Allah takes them away, and then he'll be like, adab, punishment. Like it just means punishment. Right. And like over here, iqab, adab, punishment. And then this one, punishment. So all these synonyms for the same word get used up. It's like same.
Yeah.
But you're very big on saying like, no, I think there's a significance to that. You're not the only one, but you make that a very prominent point of your discussions. So why is that, and why is that significant? Why can't we just say synonyms? Same.
So I think word choice is one component of language. Word choice, sequence, rhetorical devices, repetitions, brevity. Why is he being so brief? Why is he being more detailed here? Why is he repeating himself here? Why, like you said, why are synonyms being used? Why not the other synonym to be used? These are all language-related questions, right? And I was fascinated with the language of the Quran. And a lot of people just see me as the language guy with Quran. But I would say language is actually the key to open all the other doors. And it's not the end, it's the beginning. The language is like, to me, it's like the first step. If I was to say, okay, so somebody asked me, what's your process with a surah? Like, what's step by step? What would you do? I would say I'd first identify the key words in that surah and really dig into the etymology, the origin of those words. So really understand the richness of the words being used by Allah in this surah. I'd take that off my plate first. Really address that first. Then I would try to understand the internal mechanism, logic of this surah. And I would use knowledge of that etymology as part of what's going to inform this discussion, right? Because it may not be as obvious if I didn't do that. So sometimes, jama' and jama' is very obvious, right? But people wouldn't make a connection between words like fujur and suda, but I would, because now I looked at the etymology. So there's a subtle undercurrent between the two that brings the two words together, right? So doing that homework first is now, and from a principle, traditional point of view, Allah says, بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ. So the attribute given to the language is the same attribute given to the Quran itself, as if to say, Quran mubin, lisan mubin. So the same mubin is being used.
Clear, yeah.
So clear and clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, to really get to the clarity of the Quran, you must be humble to the clarity of the language of the Quran. So I that's kind of my first steps in any surah. And then on top of that, I build the study of tafsir, the basic tafsir, which is its own kind of endeavor. And on top of all of that, I build a repository of my unanswered questions. If I was a non-Muslim reading this, what would be my questions? When a mushrik was reading this listening to this in Makkah, what were they thinking? How were they processing this? I won't answer it. I'll just tell you, like, when you hear La uqsimu, no, I swear, right? If Abu Jahl was listening to that, what would he think? Who's the I? And I swear. He'd think it's the Prophet. But when I listen to it as a Muslim and I hear La uqsimu, who am I thinking it is? It's Allah.
No.
So now there's two very different, deliberately intended audiences by Allah. He intended the non-believer to think, at the time, this is the Prophet talking. And he tended later generations to think this is Allah talking, and with two very different consequences and impacts. And now those impacts deserve study, right? So but that's all built on top of language. So to me, language is, I don't know what I would have done without it. Honestly, I don't think I could have had the connection with the Quran that I do. And certainly etymology is a big part of that, the origins of words, but it's not the only part. It's the more I'm studying balagha, the more I'm realizing that
there's being rhetoric.
Yeah, rhetoric and rhetorical devices and drawing from Arabic literature. What's really interesting now is I tell them, like, read the translation first, try to make sense of it first.
Do you have a specific translation you like to advise people to
For
read?
Surat Yusuf, I like mine and Suhaib's. We did that one at least. Abdul Halim is still kind of a go-to for me. Abdul Halim was concerned with the flow of the text.
Yes.
So he overlooked the nuances of the text, and he's just trying to get the overall sense, which is one legitimate way of attempting to translate the Quran.
Okay.
Those, like when I struggle to identify the nuances, then the flow of the language becomes clunky. Yeah. Because you're chop, you're stopping, thinking, and it doesn't flow, right? Yeah. So translation is this constant tension between the individual components and the overall sense. So to get a really good, well-read, like he consulted Ibe Ashur, Razi, he looked at the literary tafsir, and then he's like, okay, you know what? The literary sense that comes from this ayah, here's my aggregate conclusion of that. Okay. Right? So in that sense, I really do like his translation.
What do you see for Bayna beyond your death? Like, where does Bayna Institute lie? Like, what does Bayna carry on beyond?
I'm really excited about the legacy to leave behind it. Bayna, I did some calculating. My own study of the Quran and the Deeper Look series, which to me is my life project, we're about 12 to 15 years from completion. If I continue to stay on this full-time trajectory, that's a 12 to 15 year project. There's about 380 pages of the Quran that I still need to cover in the Deeper Look series. So one of the things, and other visions of Bayna kind of emanate from that. I want to be able to leave a resource behind in the study and appreciation of the Quran that becomes a stepping stone for future generations to take the exploration of the Quran to just new heights. So I become not the climax, but the first step I want to help towards a renaissance in Quranic education, and if I can have a small contribution, Bayna can have a small piece of that, then life well lived, and I am already seeing the fruits of that emerge as I engage in this project, because I could have just sat behind a camera. It would be so much cheaper. Stay at home, turn the camera on, talk about a surah. But the Quran Week thing, going to Stuttgart, going to Scotland, going to Minnesota, going to Jersey, going to Florida, etc. It's a toll on me, toll on the family, expensive. Why am I doing it? Because everywhere I've gone, it seems like young people and old alike, they get re-engaged with the study and exploration of the Quran, and it becomes a starting point for them, which is so exciting to see. So there's stuff we're doing online, and then there's kind of this groundswell happening literally on the ground with Quran exploration. So that's really, really exciting to me. The overall vision of Bayna is I want to leave behind, 1, resources. 2, I want to be able to leave behind eventually a Quran seminary archive. So like if somebody asked, I want a bachelor's degree in Quranic Studies. If somebody hypothetically asked that question, what would that be made of? What courses would it have? And do we have a list of those courses? And how will those courses work with each other? And have we developed that course material? And have we taught that course material? And is it available? Like lynda.com, like, those other educational institutions that you can take a course. I want to be able to coursify Quran education beyond the tafsir, but somebody that takes a step back and says, I want to actually, at an institutional level, study the Quran. Because after serving the madaris and seeing that Quran, like an ijazah in Quran studies or a degree, a shahada in Quran studies, isn't really there, not really, then we could do something about that. And that's kind of one of the longer term visions. The final piece of this is I want to be able to develop publications and materials that and hopefully when Bayna grows enough two areas, creative and research, that actually outlive what I'm doing. So instead of the goal of Bayina is to produce the next speaker, no, the goal of Bayina is to produce the next wave of exploration into the Quran. And I want to be able to, inshallah, grow the organization to the point where there's an endowment and there's a self-funding mechanism by which people that are studying, neuroscience, people that are studying quantum physics, can be in conversation at symposia, at well-organized forums. They can be in conversation with leading Quranic studies scholars on specific heavy-handed issues, right? And to be able to create a forum for those to continue going. Because I don't think the future is in individual contributions. I think the future is in collaborative contributions. And so to give you an example, the famous ayah of hitting women, right? Dr. Saqib wrote a paper on hitting women. My idea was, okay, one day Bayina will have a symposium where divorce attorneys, social workers, people that survived abusive marriages, fuqaha, muhaddithin, on every end of the spectrum. The scholars that say beat with a toothbrush, or people that say don't leave a mark, or people that say it's all good, green light, just go and it's the UFC, or people that say no, we're misreading it. Let's have a rereading of it. Let's have everybody on the table. Let's debate and hash this out because it affects millions of lives, right? This ayah alone can affect millions and millions of lives, right? So let's take his paper and let people rip into it. Let's see where their criticisms are coming from, what their evidences are, and let the public be an audience to that. Let the public see that this debate is actually happening, because the Sunni narrative so far, at least in our age, most of it is talking at people instead of talking to people, right? You'll say something, then somebody will write something or say something about what you said instead of talking to you, right? And of course, the social media world has enhanced that. So podcasts are one thing, but then you do something and then somebody makes a video essay about what you've done. And then they make a video essay about that video essay or whatever. Like, this has become a thing.
It's the new age, like PDF refutation.
This is the new age of PDF refutation. But I want to be able to bring that mechanism back to actual discussion.
Also the curriculum, right? The K through 12 curriculum, you had mentioned that earlier.
K through 12, I want to revolutionize Arabic education. I want to automate Arabic education. So I want to compete with or outdo what Duolingo is able to do with languages for Quranic Arabic.
Okay.
And I want to put a system behind it so that, because the curriculum's already there, put a system behind it so that universities around the world, institutions, Islamic schools, or end users can actually use that as a platform to say, okay, we can track exactly how much Arabic our students know, how much they can grasp, how much ahead they have to go. Like, we can put actual systems behind that.
Okay.
Right? And the more we can automate that, the more we can perfect that, we can actually create a new standard for Quranic Arabic education around the world. And then the same thing I want to do with actually Quranic vocabulary, or Quran comprehension, Quran conceptual comprehension based on each age group. And so I want to see Bayina be at the forefront of creative, academic, and tech. Those are the three that I want to be able to kind of explore new territories in. Alhamdulillah, the team is really great right now. And
amazing.
We have really, really inspired, very driven people that are trying to take this to the next level. And the kind of support that we're getting internationally. So here in the